For thousands of years, humanity looked up at the night sky and saw a roof, a glittering dome of stars that marked the absolute boundary of our earthly existence. We built empires, we fought bloody wars, and we drew invisible borders across the dirt. But the sky was an untouchable sanctuary, a silent witness to our endless struggles. Kings and emperors could conquer continents, but they could never conquer the clouds. If you are lying in the dark right now, close your eyes for a moment. Imagine that infinite canopy above you. Feel the vast, crushing weight of the atmosphere pressing down on the quiet earth. For centuries, the night sky was the only place where humans could not shed blood. But history is a relentless tide, and the human mind is a dangerous architect. Tonight, we will drift back to a moment when the impossible was written into existence. A moment when military men, sitting in smoke-filled rooms, looked up at that ancient, starry roof and decided to turn it into a door. It is the summer of 1942. The world is burning. Across the oceans, the relentless machinery of war is grinding millions of lives into dust. If you listen closely, you can almost hear the distant, muffled echoes of artillery tearing through the European countryside. But here, in the suffocating heat of Camp Claiborne, Louisiana, there is no sound of gunfire. There is only the low, monotonous hum of an oscillating fan pushing warm, humid air across a wooden desk. A single desk lamp casts a yellow, flickering glow over a sprawling map. The air is thick with the smell of cheap tobacco, stale coffee, and the metallic scent of nervous sweat. In this quiet, unassuming room, a piece of paper is being passed across the table. It is a simple administrative order, carrying a few lines of typewritten text. But the ink on that page is about to alter the fundamental laws of human warfare. It is the order to transform the 82nd Infantry Division into the first ever Airborne Division. To understand the sheer, overwhelming psychological weight of this concept, we must strip away the modern illusions of technology. Today, we step onto airplanes with the casual indifference of boarding a bus. But in 1942, the sky was still an alien frontier. The men being drafted into this new airborne unit were not super soldiers bred in laboratories. They were ordinary boys. Farmhands from the sweeping plains of the Midwest, coal miners from the dark veins of the Appalachian Mountains, factory workers from the crowded, smoke-choked streets of industrial cities. Most of them had never even seen the inside of an airplane. Now, the military was asking them to do something that defied millions of years of human evolution. They were asking them to conquer the most primal, deeply rooted instinct in the human brain, the absolute, paralyzing fear of falling. Imagine standing at the edge of a great abyss. Your heart hammers against your ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage of bone. Your breathing becomes shallow, ragged. Every nerve ending in your body screams at you to step back, to seek the safety of solid ground. Gravity is not just a physical force. It is an emotional anchor. It tells us where we belong. But the architects of the airborne doctrine were asking these young men to sever that anchor, to stand at the open door of a transport plane, staring out into the roaring, freezing blackness of the midnight sky, and voluntarily step into the void. It was an act of profound psychological violence against their own nature. They had to learn how to fall, not just physically, but mentally. They had to learn how to surrender completely to the invisible hands of the wind. It is a strange paradox of history. While politicians shouted behind podiums and generals moved wooden blocks across massive, brightly lit maps in the safe confines of underground bunkers, thousands of young men were silently learning how to embrace a different kind of darkness. They were not charging across muddy fields or huddled in flooded trenches. They were suspended in the quiet terror of the sky. While the rest of the world was focused on the loud, deafening roar of tanks and artillery, a silent revolution was taking place in the clouds. In those early days of training, there was no glory. There were only broken bones, shattered nerves, and the quiet, desperate prayers whispered into the deafening roar of the aircraft engines. The transformation from a boy attached to the earth to a man who commands the sky is not a gentle process. It requires a systematic dismantling of everything they knew to be true. The training was brutal, repetitive, and deeply psychological. They jumped from wooden towers, feeling the violent, bone-jarring snap of the harness over and over again. They packed their own parachutes, folding the thin, fragile silk with trembling hands, knowing that a single tangled line, a single momentary lapse in concentration would result in a silent, terrifying plunge into the earth. The parachute became their only god, their only salvation in a world that had suddenly lost its floor. And as they trained, the clock was ticking. The hourglass of history had been turned. The world did not have time to wait for them to become comfortable with the abyss. The theatres of war were expanding, and the old methods of moving armies across the globe were proving too slow, too predictable. The military architects had planted the seed, and now they demanded the harvest. They needed a force that could bypass the impassable, a force that could strike from the one direction the enemy could never truly fortify. The grand illusion of the untouchable roof was about to be shattered forever. The boys from the farms and the factories had become something else entirely. They were no longer just infantrymen. They were the pioneers of a new, terrifying dimension of warfare. They had learned to suppress the screaming instincts of their own minds, replacing fear with a cold, rigid discipline. But training is a controlled environment. It is an illusion of safety. The true test of their psychological conditioning, the true cost of this arrogant gamble to weaponize the sky, was yet to come. It would not happen under the bright, forgiving sun of the American South. It would happen in the pitch-black, chaotic skies over the Mediterranean, where the wind does not forgive and the darkness swallows men whole. July 1943. The theoretical physics of the training grounds are about to violently collide with the brutal reality of war. The stage is set over the Mediterranean Sea. The operation is codenamed Husky. It is the Allied invasion of Sicily, and it will be the very first time the 82nd Airborne Division is unleashed into the night. If you are listening to this in the comfort of your room, try to imagine the profound, vibrating discomfort of a C-47 Skytrain flying low over dark, churning waters. There are no padded seats here. There is no climate control. There is only the harsh, unyielding shell of cold aluminum separating fragile human bodies from the unforgiving elements. Inside the fuselage, the air is thick, heavy, and suffocating. It is a potent cocktail of aviation fuel, hot engine oil, the metallic tang of weapons grease, and the undeniable, sour scent of collective human fear. The noise inside the aircraft is absolute. The twin Pratt and Whitney engines do not just roar. They scream. They send a constant, bone-rattling vibration through the metal floorboards, traveling up the heavy jump boots of the men sitting shoulder to shoulder in the dim, red light. That crimson glow is the only illumination in the cabin, painting the faces of the young paratroopers in a demonic, bloody hue. They sit in near absolute silence, crushed together by the sheer bulk of their gear. They are carrying the weight of the world on their backs, literally. Main parachute, reserve parachute, rifles broken down in jump bags, ammunition, grenades, rations, water canteens. Every man is a heavily armored capsule of destruction, weighing upwards of 200 pounds, trapped in a flying tin can that is hurtling through the dark. They cannot speak to one another. The deafening roar of the engines makes conversation impossible. So, they are left alone with their thoughts. In a crowded plane carrying dozens of men, each soldier is entirely isolated within the fragile confines of his own mind. They close their eyes, gripping the static line cable above their heads until their knuckles turn stark white. The red light casts deep, hollow shadows under their eyes. They are reviewing the jump procedures, counting the seconds, praying to whatever god they believe in, or perhaps just desperately trying to remember the soft, quiet sound of their mother's voice or the smell of their childhood home. The psychological tension stretches so tight it feels as though the very air might snap, and then the red light flashes to green. The jumpmaster shouts, a sound barely audible over the wind, screaming through the open door. Stand up, hook up. The metal clips clatter against the steel cable. Check equipment. Sound off for equipment check. A wave of confirmation rolls from the back of the plane to the front. Stand in the door. This is the moment. The point of no return. The cold Mediterranean wind howls into the cabin, biting at their faces, stealing their breath. And as they shuffle toward that black, yawning square of emptiness, they realize the terrifying truth. The flawless plans drawn up on brightly lit tables in Washington and London are disintegrating before they even hit the ground. The weather over Sicily is disastrous. High winds, far exceeding the safety limits for a peacetime jump, are violently buffeting the aircraft. The navigation, relying on rudimentary systems and visual cues in the pitch black, has gone catastrophically wrong. The planes are scattered. They are lost. Instead of a tight, coordinated formation delivering a concentrated force onto precise drop zones, the C-47s are flying wildly off course, confused by the darkness, the wind, and the sudden, terrifying eruption of anti-aircraft fire from the ground below. The sky, which was supposed to be their silent ally, has turned into a chaotic nightmare of tearing wind and explosive flak. As the men hurl themselves out of the door, the slipstream hits them like a solid brick wall. They are violently tossed into the dark. The heavy, reassuring snap of the static line pulling the parachute open is their only tether to reality. But, as the silk canopy blooms above them, the true horror of their situation sets in. They are not falling together. They are falling alone. The high winds catch their parachutes, dragging them miles away from their intended targets, miles away from their commanders, miles away from anyone they know. They are scattered like autumn leaves in a midnight hurricane. Imagine that descent. The violent roar of the airplane fades away instantly, replaced by the eerie, rushing whistle of the wind through the suspension lines. Below them, the earth is a solid, black void, occasionally illuminated by the terrifying, bright green and red traces of anti-aircraft guns reaching up like desperate, fiery fingers. A paratrooper hanging in his harness in the dark is the most vulnerable creature on Earth. He cannot hide. He cannot fight back. Dark, he can only hang there, swaying helplessly like a pendulum, waiting for the sudden, crushing impact of the ground. The loneliness of that descent is a heavy, suffocating blanket. In those few minutes, before their boots touch the rocky Sicilian soil, they are entirely divorced from the massive military machine that brought them there. They are just solitary souls drifting through an uncaring universe. When they finally hit the ground, the impact is brutal. Ankles twist, bones fracture against the unseen rocks. They collapse into the darkness, frantically trying to collapse their parachutes before the wind drags them to death. And as they sit up, cutting themselves free from the tangled silk, they realize they are completely isolated. No radios, no commanders, no familiar faces. Just the dark, hostile hills of Sicily, filled with an enemy that is now fully awake and hunting. Friendly fire erupts in the confusion. Units fire upon each other in the blind panic of the night. It is a scene of absolute, unmitigated chaos. A symphony of errors written in blood and confusion. By all conventional military metrics, the chaotic drop over Sicily was a disaster. The meticulous plans were shattered. The casualties from accidents and friendly fire were tragically high, and the objective of a concentrated airborne assault had seemingly failed. The architects of the sky had gambled, and it appeared they had lost terribly. But strangely, history does not always measure success by the perfection of the plan. It measures success by the echo of the impact, because out of this catastrophic failure, out of this terrifying, scattered darkness, a profound realization began to dawn on the military strategists, a realization that would birth the most terrifying tactical advantage of the modern world. The chaotic aftermath of Sicily could have been the end. The generals could have closed the door to the sky, returning to the predictable mathematics of ground warfare. But in the quiet, smoke-filled debriefing rooms back in England, a different conclusion was being drawn. The scattering of the paratroopers, while a logistical nightmare, had produced an unexpected psychological effect on the enemy. The German defenders in Sicily were terrified, completely disoriented by an enemy that seemed to materialize from the shadows, striking from every direction at once. The chaos, the military architects realized, was not just a tragic side effect. It was a potent weapon. It simply needed to be refined, controlled, and focused. And so, the meticulous, obsessive process of perfection began. And the dominoes were falling, leading toward a much darker, much grander stage. In the cold, cavernous hangars of England, the rituals of the airborne became a solemn, almost monastic practice. Every mistake made over the Mediterranean was dissected and corrected. The equipment was modified. The static line, that vital tether between life and death, was reinforced. Imagine the heavy, satisfying metallic click of that steel hook snapping onto the anchor line cable. That single sound became the heartbeat of the 82nd Airborne. The pre-jump rituals grew rigid, meditative. The men practiced their exits until their bodies moved on pure, unconscious instinct. They folded their silk canopies in absolute silence, running their fingers over the delicate seams, understanding that their very existence depended on the perfection of those folds. The rustle of thousands of yards of silk echoing in the empty hangars sounded like a gentle, breathing tide. And then came June 1944. The operation was Overlord. The destination was Normandy. If the drop over Sicily was a chaotic experiment, the assault on Fortress Europe was the masterstroke of the airborne architects. The evening of June 5th was unseasonably cold. Across the airfields of England, thousands of men sat in the damp grass under the wings of their C-47s. Their faces were blackened with burnt cork and ash, turning them into living shadows. The smell of the tarmac, wet with evening dew and spilled aviation fuel, hung heavy in the air. There was no boastful shouting, no reckless bravado. There was only the heavy, collective silence of men who knew they were about to step into the pages of history, or vanish into the dark forever. As the armada of aircraft took off, darkening the moonlit sky over the English Channel, the mood inside the fuselage was different from Sicily. It was colder, more calculated. They were flying toward the heavily fortified coast of France, toward the sleeping villages of Normandy, like Sainte-Mère-Église. Down below, the German sentries stood in their concrete bunkers, staring out at the empty Black Sea, believing that the ocean was the only path of invasion. They believed in the old rules of warfare. They believed in front lines. But as the C-47s crossed the coastline, the old rules were quietly, violently erased. The green lights flashed. The men stood up, hooked up, and shuffled into the roaring slipstream. But this time, let us not focus on the loud, chaotic gunfire that would soon follow. Let us pause and look at the majestic, deeply melancholic visual of that moment. Thousands of dark silhouettes stepping out into the pale moonlight. For a brief, suspended second, they are just falling shadows against the clouds, and then the canopies deploy. They bloom like thousands of pale, ghostly flowers opening all at once in the midnight sky. It was a silent rain of men, falling softly over a sleeping continent. If you are lying in the dark right now, imagine the chilling, solitary sound of silk snapping open against the midnight wind, a sudden deceleration, and then just the gentle sway of the pendulum in the dark. It is a terrifyingly peaceful sensation, hanging there in the cold air, listening to the rushing wind, looking down at the patchwork of Norman fields bathed in silver light. For those few seconds of descent, there is no war. There is only gravity, the wind, and the profound, isolating beauty of the night. But the impact of this silent rain was devastating, not just in terms of explosives or gunfire, but in the permanent psychological damage it inflicted on the concept of warfare itself. Imagine being a soldier on the ground. You have built fortresses. You have laid minefields. You sleep soundly in your barracks behind miles of heavily defended lines, secure in the knowledge that the enemy is far away. And then you wake up to the soft rustle of silk in the trees outside your window. You look up, and the stars themselves are falling. The enemy is in your backyard, in your streets, on your roof. The 82nd Airborne had successfully weaponized the night sky. They had shattered the illusion of the front line. The enemy could no longer feel safe, anywhere, at any time. The sky was no longer a protective roof. It was a trapdoor, hanging perpetually open above their heads. The psychological terror of knowing that death could fall gently from the clouds while you slept was a burden the human mind was not designed to carry. The architects had achieved their impossible vision, but as the sun rose over the blood-soaked fields of Normandy, illuminating the tangled white parachutes draped over trees and hedgerows like funeral shrouds, a new, even more terrifying doctrine was quietly taking shape in the minds of the strategists. The true secret of the 82nd was not just about space, it was about time. The war in Europe eventually burned itself out. The great empires that had shattered the world slowly collapsed into the ashes of history. The C-47 transport planes, once the roaring chariots of the sky, were parked in long, silent rows on sun-baked runways, their metal skins slowly giving way to rust. The pristine white silk of the parachutes, which had once filled the Normandy sky like descending ghosts, was carefully folded away, destined to fade in the forgotten corners of dusty museums. The world breathed a collective, shuddering sigh of relief. The guns were silent, the boundaries of the earth were redrawn. But in the quiet, sterile planning rooms of the American military, the architects of the Airborne were not resting. They were looking at the map of the world, and they were realizing something profoundly chilling. The true secret weapon they had forged in the chaotic winds over Sicily and the cold moonlight of France was not the parachute. It was not the bravery of the young men who stepped into the abyss. It was something entirely invisible. It was time. For centuries, human conflict was dictated by the agonizingly slow crawl of geography. If a crisis erupted on the other side of the globe, the response was measured in weeks, sometimes months. Armies had to be gathered, massive steel ships had to be loaded, endless oceans had to be crossed at the mercy of the tides and the weather. Time was a vast, unforgiving ocean that separated the sword from the shield. But the 82nd Airborne had fundamentally broken that ancient equation. They had proven that the sky could bypass the earth. Now, sitting in the quiet aftermath of the Second World War, the strategists asked a new, terrifying question. If we can fall from the sky, how fast can we reach any coordinate on the surface of the planet? The answer they devised over the following decades became the quietest, most awe-inspiring military doctrine of the modern era. It is known simply as the Global Response Force. The doctrine states, with a cold, bureaucratic certainty, that the 82nd Airborne Division can put wheels up and boots on the ground anywhere on the earth. Within exactly 18 hours. Think about the sheer, staggering arrogance of that number. 18 hours. The time it takes for the Earth to not even complete a single rotation. In the span of a single day, while you sleep, wake up, pour a cup of coffee, and return home as the sun sets, an entire army can materialize from the clouds, heavily armed and perfectly organized, half a world away. But let us slow down for a moment. Let us look past the impressive mathematics of logistics and the cold efficiency of military planning. Let us examine the heavy, invisible human cost of this doctrine. Because to be ready to conquer the world in 18 hours means you must live in a perpetual, agonizing state of tension. You can never truly rest. The war is never over. It is only suspended in the air, waiting for the sudden pull of gravity. Imagine a quiet, suburban house near Fort Liberty in the dead of night. The street is absolutely silent. The pale glow of a street lamp filters through the blinds, casting long, still shadows across the bedroom floor. A paratrooper is asleep next to their spouse. The only sound is the rhythmic, gentle breathing of two people at rest. But in the corner of the room, sitting quietly in the dark shadows, is a heavy, green canvas duffel bag. It is packed. It is always packed. It gathers a fine layer of dust, a silent, heavy monument to the ever-present possibility of sudden departure. The paratrooper sleeps, but it is a shallow, guarded sleep. They are listening, even in the deepest depths of their dreams, for the sudden, shrill ringing of the telephone. That phone call is the trigger of the 18-hour hourglass. When it rings, the world stops spinning. There is no time for long, emotional goodbyes. There is no time to explain the complexities of global politics. There is only a quiet kiss in the dark, the heavy, deliberate rustle of putting on a uniform in the silence of a sleeping house, the soft click of the front door closing, and the solitary drive to the airfield under the cold, indifferent stars. At the base, there is no chaotic shouting. There is a chilling, practiced silence. Thousands of men and women moving in synchronized shadows, drawing weapons, rigging heavy equipment, loading into the cavernous bellies of massive, grey C-17 transport planes that idle on the tarmac like sleeping steel leviathans. They sit in the dark cargo holds, strapped into webbed seats, just as their grandfathers did in the C-47s over Normandy. They stare at the red jump lights. The air smells of hydraulic fluid and quiet anticipation. Often, they do not even know exactly where they are going until the heavy doors seal shut and the massive jet engines begin their deafening scream. They only know that the hourglass has been turned and the sand is falling fast. This is the crushing emotional burden of the 18-hour doctrine. It is the weight of holding your breath, year after year, waiting for the sky to fall. It is a life lived entirely in the tense, silent space between the flash of lightning and the distant roll of thunder. The military architects had conquered time, yes, but in doing so, they had trapped their own creations in a perpetual, never-ending night of readiness. But let us step back from the suffocating tension of the modern era. Let us zoom out, far beyond the quiet houses of Fort Liberty, far beyond the idling engines of the massive transport planes on the tarmac. Let us look at the vast, uncaring sweep of geological time and view the brutal mathematics of human warfare through the gentle, forgiving lens of impermanence. Because no matter how powerful the military doctrine, no matter how absolute the 18-hour hourglass may seem, everything, eventually, surrenders to the quiet eraser of time. The great empires that ignited the Second World War, the regimes that believed they would rule for 1,000 years, have all crumbled into the dust of history. Their grand monuments are weathered by the rain. Their terrifying leaders are reduced to faded black and white photographs in closed books. The mighty C-47 Skytrains, the roaring chariots that first carried the boys into the Mediterranean night, have long since been silenced. Their aluminum skins, once vibrating with the frantic energy of war, are now parked in long, silent rows in the quiet corners of aviation museums. The morning dew collects on their cold wings, and spiders spin delicate, silver webs across the pilot's instruments. The pristine white silk of the parachutes that bloomed like ghosts over St. Mère-Église has yellowed, frayed, and dissolved back into the earth. The men who wore them, the young boys who conquered their primal fear of the abyss, have mostly faded into the night. Their medals sit quietly in velvet boxes, and their memories are softly blowing away like leaves in the autumn wind. The sky, the ancient starry roof that they so violently tore open, has healed itself. It remains vast, silent, and entirely indifferent to the struggles of the tiny, fragile creatures on the ground below. Tonight, the 82nd Airborne Division still exists. The 18-hour hourglass is still perfectly primed, sitting silently on the desk of history. But if you listen closely to the wind outside your window right now, you will hear nothing but the gentle rustling of the leaves. There are no sirens. There are no transport planes tearing through the clouds. The sky is peaceful. The world, for all its hidden tensions and unspoken fears, is resting. No one is falling into the dark tonight. We, too, live our lives bound by our own invisible doctrines of readiness. We spend so much of our waking hours packing our own heavy canvas bags of anxiety. We carry the crushing weight of the what-ifs on our shoulders every single day. We lay awake in the dark, staring at the ceiling, bracing for a sudden impact that may never actually come. We turn our own hourglasses over and over, trapped in a perpetual state of tension, fighting imaginary battles in the theatre of our own minds. We forget that we are not soldiers standing at the open door of a transport plane. We forget that it is safe to unhook the static line. So, as the night deepens, let us learn a lesson from the fading echoes of history. The empires of the past could not control the future, and neither can we. The absolute readiness for disaster is a burden the human soul was never meant to carry forever. The 82nd Airborne conquered the night sky, but you do not have to conquer tomorrow, not tonight. Let the C-47s rest in their museums. Let the heavy canvas bags gather dust in the corner. The world will keep spinning on its axis, the sun will inevitably rise, and the gravity of your daily life will still be there waiting for you in the morning. But for now, in this small, quiet pocket of time, you are completely safe. It is time to unbuckle the heavy harness. Let the heavy, metal armor of your daily anxieties fall away, piece by piece, into the dark. Feel the incredible lightness of your own body as you sink deeper and deeper into the soft sanctuary of your mattress. There is no wind here. There is no cold slipstream. There is only the slow, rhythmic rise and fall of your own breathing. Close your eyes. Surrender to the absolute stillness of the room. Let the stories of the past drift away like fading shadows, leaving nothing behind but a profound, empty peace. If this journey through the quiet corners of history has brought you a moment of calm, please leave a gentle subscription to the channel so we may drift through time together again. But for now, the jump is over, the sky is clear, sleep well, and we will meet again in the past. Tomorrow night,